My argument is, and not only mine, many institutional economists' argument is that economic growth happens when people take resources, very simply put, and rearrange them in a more valuable way, very simply. And it's easier said than done. You have very limited resources, perhaps not even enough natural resources, but only human resources. Somehow you get the resources, you import them because you have the human resources, and rearrange them in a more valuable way. The mix of ingredients according to a recipe. Rearrange them according to a particular recipe. We argue growth springs not so much from having lots of resources coming, but from better recipes. And not just from more cooking. What we mean by that, take Soviet Union. If you look at the data in Soviet Union, you will see every year a railroad is being built from St. Petersburg all the way to Vladivostok, we call Trans-Siberian. Every year they say, well, we have added more rubles, billions of rubles, we have hired more people. So this is more cooking. Adding inputs, one after the other, will not yield the desired result because they don't have the recipe. They don't have the right recipe. The right recipe gives higher productivity. It's not so much giving more inputs, capital and labor that will generate growth. But you put this in a mix according to a particular very, very effective recipe. And not just from more cooking. More cooking meaning of what we call augmentation of labor and capital. Adding more labor, adding more capital. We can continue to do that and be in a panacea. Soviet Union was in a panacea for 70 years, pulling its own administrators as well as the rest of the world, including CIA, and they are growing very fast. And I remember in the 1950s, if you look at the literature, the Americans were very worried about the Soviet growth. But if you really look at it, the productivity change has been minimal, almost negative, zero. An example, augmentation of capital and labor without any significant productivity gains. I just gave the example. What are the new recipes? New recipes are new ideas, but not just ideas. But what is lacking in many countries where the growth does not take place are the incentives. Intense incentives to acquire and apply these new ideas. There are lots of ideas out there. There are lots of research being done which are publicly available. Alright, great professors are there in all countries, develop, and they have access to these ideas. But there are no incentives for them to both acquire these ideas and develop or apply them or come up with even new ideas. The economies that will do really well are those that come up with the best institutional framework. I am still holding back on defining what institutions are. I'll come to that in a second. And keep you in suspense for a while. The institutional framework for simultaneously achieving both production of new ideas and their widespread use. For example, former Soviet Union had a large number of research scientists. And in fact, if you look at the actual number of physicists and the mathematicians and the computer scientists and the microbiologists they produced, they dwarf the number of those who were produced by the US. I remember a speech given by Nehru, who went to the Soviet Union, who was given this data, and he said, well, there is, within the next decade or so, Soviet Union is going to take over all the other countries in terms of their capacity to do great things like the research, the rockets, the airplanes, the other technological innovation. It did not happen, right? Because they didn't have, they had access to new ideas, but they didn't have the incentive to apply those ideas. If you go to Moscow State University,